Now, let's talk about the second pillar, which is the prayers, the salat. Now, this one, I would argue, is probably the most telling of all, because you can tell how devout a Muslim is based on whether or not he or she follows all of the prayers, the prescribed prayers for every day. There are five prayers that Muslims are supposed to do every single day. And it's not like the Christian kind of prayers where you have a lot of flexibility. You can choose for yourself how you're going to pray, how you're going to approach God, and what you're going to say, what position. For Muslims, they have prescribed times, they have prescribed formulas, they have exactly the position of their body. Everything is prescribed. The first prayer that they have to do is called Salat al-Fajr. And that means basically the sunrise prayer or the dawn prayer. And as the name tells you, this is basically at the first sight of light. When the sun gets up in the morning, that's when they're supposed to do that first prayer. Now, as you can imagine, as the seasons change, sometimes it's going to be quite difficult to do the morning prayer because the sun gets up quite early, especially in the summer, depending on where you live in the world. And so sometimes it's really difficult for Muslims to do the five prayers, especially the first prayer that's prescribed. And so what they're going to do often is that they're going to have remedial prayer. And so not all Muslims will do the morning, the sunrise prayer at the time that is prescribed. And so they will do it the next time that they do their prayer, and they will do twice as many prayers or as many prostrations as they would do normally to make up for the prayers that they have missed. The second prescribed prayer is called Salat al-Dhuhri, and that basically means the noontime prayer. And this prayer is prescribed at the time when the sun is the highest in the sky. The third prescribed prayer is called Salat al-Asri, and that's basically the time when your shadow is the same length as your body, depending on the position of the sun. The fourth prescribed prayer is called Salat al-Maghrib, and that's basically the sunset prayer. And of course, that happens when the sun is setting. That's a prescribed time for that prayer. And the last prescribed prayer, the fifth prescribed prayer, is called Salat al-Isha. And that's basically the nighttime prayer. And that happens when you don't see any more sunlight at all. That's when they are supposed to do that prayer. So these are the five times that every single day Muslims are supposed to do their prescribed prayers. Now, as you can imagine, all of these, because they have to do with the position of the sun, and that's what determines the exact time, sometimes it can be really difficult, especially during the summer. And so Muslims have found ways to get around these difficulties. For example, here in the Kingdom of Bahrain, the Shias don't actually pray 5 times a day. They actually pray only 3 times a day, but they make up for the missed prayers by doing something similar to remedial prayer. And so they're going to say, okay, well, let's take during the second prescribed prayer, we're going to pray the first one and the second one together. And so they're going to do twice as many prostrations as they would normally do. And then they do the same in the afternoon. They do 2 of them combined together. Because as you can imagine, it would be really difficult if you're trying to work, if you're trying to go to school, if you're trying to take care of a family, to have to break up your schedule 5 times a day, especially in the afternoon, it becomes very difficult. And so that's why they have found ways to kind of make concessions and to not have to do it 5 times a day, but still to fulfill these requirements as it is in Islamic tradition. It's important for you to remember that this is a non-negotiable in Islam. It's not like in Christianity when, you kind of decide when you want to pray, how many times you want to pray, how you want to pray. It's not the same thing in Islam. Yeah, they can do additional prayers if they want to, But these 5 prescribed times of prayer are essential, non-negotiable. And if they miss any of those times, they're supposed to make it up. And that's why I was saying you can tell how devout a Muslim is based on whether or not he or she will actually do every prescribed prayer. And I know, for example, there's a man that I know here who he would get up really early in the morning, sometimes at almost 3:30 or something like that, so that he could do the prescribed morning prayer, the sunrise prayer as it is prescribed. And so you hear the call to prayer, and you're going to hear that. And sometimes people, they get bothered by it because sometimes it interrupts what you're doing. It's very loud. Some people, they're trying to sleep, and it's really funny because here, when we first moved to Bahrain and we were looking for a place where to live, some people were telling us, be careful, because if you live too close to a mosque, you might be woken up by the call to prayer. So you might want to be careful how closely you live to a mosque. And so that's a reality, a daily reality for all the people living in Muslim countries. I even remember sometimes I was invited to go have a meal with some of my Muslim friends. And a few times, when either we were learning Arabic or having a conversation, and when the prescribed time of prayer came, the people just stopped what they were doing and they started praying right there in front of me. And I remember this one time, there was a whole group of guys who stopped what they were doing and started, going down on their knees and, prostrating themselves and doing the required prayers right in front of us. And it was really interesting because you could tell the ones that were really devout were making sure that they did it exactly how they were supposed to. And then there were others who they thought, well, this is kind of awkward. Some of these guys are not Muslims, so we don't want to just make it really odd for them. And so you saw kind of some of them did it, some of them didn't. And I remember when they were praying, I said, well, if they're going to pray, then I'll spend that time praying for them. And so I quietly and silently prayed for these Muslims as they were doing their prayers, that God would reveal himself to them during that time. And so it's an interesting reality that you have to face in a Muslim country like this. As I said, there's actually a prescribed formula for how they're supposed to do their prayers. It's not just the time, it's also the position of the body, what they're supposed to recite. And so, for example, they're going to begin on their feet. They're going to proclaim that God is great. They're going to recite the Shahada. And then you're going to see them changing their position. They will bow down, just kind of bending their bodies. And then eventually they're going to get on their knees. They're going to spend some time on their knees. Then they're going to prostrate themselves. They're going to get back on their knees and prostrate themselves. And so there's a required number of times they're supposed to do that, depending on which prayer they're doing. And so these are very regimented prayers. The liturgy is something that has been prescribed. It's not something they can change. And then there's a little bit of flexibility. There's a time when they're supposed to kind of quietly meditate after they've done their prescribed prayers. And so, but all in all, it's very structured. It's very regimented, the way that they're supposed to do their prayers. Now, there are a few differences based on their tradition. Here, we see a huge difference between Sunnis and Shias, the way that they pray. I mean, overall, they're going to have the same structure, but they're going to have some differences. For example, the Sunnis, usually they're just going to have a rug and they're going to do their prayers on the rug. Now, the Shia here in Bahrain, they feel very strongly that you should put your head on a stone, that it shouldn't just be on the rug. Every Shia is supposed to have a little stone that they carry with them with their rugs, and they're supposed to place it where they put their foreheads. And in fact, because they keep doing that every day, they put their foreheads on a stone. You can tell the devout Muslims by the fact that they have kind of a scar on their forehead. They have, it left an imprint of some sort, and some of them, it looks pretty bad. It's like their foreheads are bruised because of constant prostration and hitting their foreheads against that stone. And so once again, there's some little differences in exactly how they're going to do their prayers. But overall, whether they're Shia or Sunni or other kinds of Muslims, they're all going to do their five prescribed prayers every day, the way that it's been in Islamic tradition for centuries. And like I said at the beginning, because it's pretty difficult to have to do this every day, to have to stop your schedule to do these 5 times a day. And that's why, a lot of the non-devout Muslims, the more modern Muslims, are going to kind of let the prayers go. And you're going to see they're going to make excuses. And they're going to say, well, I have a legitimate reason why I can't do these prayers, whether it's work or school or something else. And so they're going to make excuses, which is understandable, kind of in the same way that Christians make excuses why they can't go to church, even though the Bible tells us that one day a week we should take time to worship the Lord, to stop our work. A lot of Christians, they make excuses. They say, oh, I have to work, I have to do this or that. And so Muslims will do the same, but with regards to the 5 daily prayers.